Well, it's December. Yeah,
It's 7 o'clock, so I guess we'll get started. First of all, thank you all for coming this evening. My name is Jane Bertoni, and I'm the board member chairing the steering committee on redistricting. Fellow board members Carl Croft and Suzanne Simonelli will also participate in the committee meetings. My 3 children have all graduated from Downingtown, my youngest in 2010. Although none were redistricted because we live within walking distance of Beaver Creek, I have participated in and attended many redistricting committee meetings in the past. We're here tonight to kick off our 2012-2013 redistricting effort. As you are all well aware, there are overcrowding issues due to population shifts throughout the district. Pickering Valley today stands at 675 students, while Brandywine Wallace and Springton Manor have 382 and 433 students respectively. So there is a need to rebalance attendance boundaries, particularly in our elementary schools. The purpose of the meeting tonight is for you to meet our demographer, Vern McKissick, and have him explain how they go about the process of making redistricting recommendations to the steering committee. Regarding the steering committee, the goal for the board has been to include on this committee those who have had children redistricted in the past and those who are neighborhoods that may in fact be moved in this endeavor. We have attempted to include all schools, all townships, and Downingtown Borough. I would like to take a moment at this time to thank my fellow board members for the time, effort, and thoughtfulness put in the process. As you can see by the graph up there, we had over 310 applicants from all the different areas. There is a perception in the public that Downingtown is always redistricting. This is in fact true because we are a growing community. In fact, from the close of school in June of this year, 2012, until the start of school in late August, we've added 155 students. Plus, a new 6th grade center was just put out to bid, and we hope to open this new school in 2 years. The start of the 2014 school year, if all things go according to plan. When we open schools, we have to fill the school, which means moving students. When new neighborhoods are built, we need to put them in existing schools. As population shifts, the number in schools change, and we need to modify boundaries. In my history with the district, we have moved students when we opened Bradford Heights, Shimona Creek, the 2 middle schools, the 2 high schools, and Springton Manor. It amounts to approximately once every 6 or 7 years. When this plan is implemented, it will coincide with the opening of the 6th grade center, and it will have been 7 years since we last redistricted. Tonight we will hear from Vern McKissick of McKissick Associates. He is contracted to complete a demographic study that will show where we are now and where we can anticipate in growth for the next 5, 10, 20, and 40 years. We will not be discussing boundary ratifications. This is only an overview of the data that the committee will be reviewing. All this information will be posted on the Downingtown website at www.basd.org. Before I turn this over to Vern, there are 2 points that I would like to emphasize. There are no plans currently on the table. This is what the redistricting steering committee will be working on. This is especially important for our members. I have seen nothing, and to my knowledge, there's been no discussion. We are starting with a blank slate. And the other thing is, should the boundaries change at the high school level, seniors will be allowed to graduate from the school they have spent their high school career in if they choose. So I guess it might also be good to identify who actually is on the committee. From administration, we'll have Dr. Mussolini, our superintendent, Mr. Jeff Simmons, who's responsible for transportation, Mr. Paul Hurley, Downingtown High School East Principal, Mr. Nick Indaglio, Downingtown Middle School Principal, Mr. Joe Fernandez, Pickering Valley Elementary School, Mrs. Linda Lai at Brandywine Wallace Elementary School. We tried to pick principals that are going to be impacted by whatever moves we might make and look forward to their insight. As far as committee goes, in no particular order, we have Julie Murphy from Upper Euclid, Steph Finelli from East Brandywine, Pia DeSanto, if I could read this writing, Upper Euclid, Bill Moffitt from Euclid, John Stillman with a Westchester address, but West Bradford area, Varin, I don't want to not pronounce your name incorrectly. Last name is Gujral from Upper Euclid. Shelley Edmondson from East Brandywine with Beaver Creek. Joseph Menendez from East Ward and Downtown Borough. Terry Gabries, East Callan. Francesca Wells, Upper Euclid. Ryan Walter, Euclid. Ann Dana from Exton, and Doran Emmett, who's also, I think, from Glenwood. So everyone on the committee has had or has children at an individual elementary, middle, or high school. So we feel it's a very good representation of the entire district. With that, Herb, you're up. Yes.
Did you say there was somebody from Wallace Township? I didn't hear anybody.
There are representatives from Brandywine Wallace and Springton Manor Elementary School. I'm not,
But are they from Wallace Township?
Carl? Did I miss?
You said Glenmore, which is not a township.
Okay.
So the next question is that person reside in Wallace or another township? You also mentioned somebody's from Exton, which is also
Which would be,
not a township.
right. I probably should have said what schools. We were more concerned about schools. I apologize. We'll put the names of the actual townships up on the web. It's small print, and I should have made it larger. I apologize.
Thank you and good evening. My name is Vern McKissick with McKissick Associates Insights, and as Jane had indicated, we are going to be working with you over the next few months to hopefully come up with a consensus-based redistricting plan. We know that's been a issue over the years, something that's been the district has been trying to find the most equitable way of doing it. With me this evening, and also I'd like to introduce Krista McKissick, who's actually president of Insights, which is our planning group, slight relation there. And also John Fix. John is with Iron Compass Mapping, assisting us with our cartographic needs. So if you're into GIS and that kind of thing, you have a great conversation with John. Again, the challenge that we have in front of us here this evening is how do we find a way to fairly, I'll follow here on paper, feel kind of like Steve Jobs in 1984 with a giant image here, is how to do a data-driven framework. That is something that can allow the district to equitably provide education in an affordable manner. That's always an issue, especially when we're dealing with the current status of affairs in Harrisburg and the lack of funding or reductions. As was mentioned this evening, we're not talking about any realignments. We simply want to give you baseline data. Hopefully, if you see something you disagree with, you'll let us know. We intend this to be a revolving document or an evolving type of effort. And again, the implementation of this, anything that would come out of this process, is envisioned for the 2014-15 school year at the soonest. So it is not an immediate thing that would be an impact next year. Now, the process we're looking at, when it's done, what will the district have? Well, we're looking at some physical byproducts, one of which is independently verifiable statistics, and that's really a valuable tool in getting your support. Calculation of potential impact on operational expenses, some focus on facilities utilization, which we'll talk about a little bit, transportation, which is also an issue, and most importantly, what we're trying to do is get the right number of pupils in the right size schools in the right places. And that can be difficult as a district has grown the way yours has, and you've had to address fixes as time has gone along. This is an opportunity for consensus rather than separation. We're very concerned about that. One of the things that we can do, we don't live or reside in Downingtown. We are from Harrisburg. So we can float the trial balloons. If I don't leave here with an arrow or two stuck in my back over the next 6 months, I probably haven't done my job. But we don't know what we don't know, and it may make us better, I hope. The end of the line is we really want to end up with a process that gets us some positive community support. So what are the underlying pieces for success? Is that not wanting to communicate with you there? That'd be funny. Could be the shortest presentation I've given in a while. There it is. Say something for time. Okay, thank you. You put a presentation there. Go back there. Really, we're looking at, as I mentioned, the concept of participation, understanding, and acceptance. We'll be meeting with the school board, discussion, administration. We've met with all the building principals, I think with the exception of one. Working, of course, as was mentioned, with the community-wide stakeholders and the advisory committee. And then ultimately communicating the plan, the process of getting there, and the plan itself, whether that's physical presentations, such as tonight, whether we're looking at website availability materials, printed newsletters, distributing information to parents via students, whatever it takes to get the message out. Now, how are we going to get there? We're really looking at a three-phase process. First phase is what we've been working on over the course of the summer, a lot of what John's been doing, and that is evaluating the facilities, current projected demographics, and getting a sense of how the buildings are being used educationally. Moving from tonight, and as we meet with the committee, we'll be looking to formulate options to address certain issues. And I'll talk about what the initial areas of investigation are a little bit later. But again, focusing on transportation, future housing development. We've spent a great deal of time, met with each of the townships, the planning groups. We're accompanied in many of those with board members. We think it was a very good and open discussion. One of the things that we also be looking at is the possibility of full-day kindergarten, as well as the neighborhood and regional impacts of various changes that might come about. Those options will go through a ranking exercise, and at the end, hopefully, and we always end up with something at the end, we pick an option to take into phase 3. Phase 3 is really the refinement of this, and how this will all go together. Now, how are we going to do this? We're going to use a system called GIS, Geographic Information Systems. And I'm going to ask John to talk a little bit about what it is, and more importantly, what can you get from it. We're going to show you a lot of pretty pictures tonight. They are really just the output of a much more in-depth set of data. And so, John.
So my name is John Fix, and I'll be doing the spatial analysis portion of the project. So how we assist Vern is, throughout the project, we're actually collecting a catalog of all the information that we can obtain. And we put into a system called the GIS, or Geographic Information System. Now allows us to more effectively catalog the information, but beyond that allows us to more effectively model the information. So when scenarios are developed in terms of what's going to be impacting the development on the school, we're able to actually look at that in finer detail. Instead of looking at data from like a township-wide perspective, we're actually going down to neighborhood perspectives and actually looking at the impact of individual students instead of just kind of looking at it at district-wide. So as we go through the process and the options start getting generated, we end up going through many scenarios of running through the models, and then at some point we can also do transportation analysis where we're actually looking at busing times and see what the impact that has on the back end of any decisions that are made. And of course, the pretty pictures are something we like to output as well, so that way you can see the information in a more clear visual way that lets you make better and informed decisions.
John, what are some of the variables you track for all of these students?
All the students, I mean, in terms of students themselves, you know, we're looking at the grade, obviously the grades and, you know, the race and you know, something like the free and reduced lunch that we have sort of some economic indicators. We're also looking at things like household income. We're looking at, you know, sort of population density. We're trying to get a finer model on how many students are generated per household and looking at that in terms of the type of household. So if we're having townhouses developed or large single-family homes, what are the number of students we're generating from those types of households instead of saying, well, in this township it's 2.7 or something like that. So we're just trying to get to a more detailed level of analysis.
And what I kind of like to call GIS is CAD for maps. If you think about the way, if you've ever worked with a drafting computer design system, it's really pretty much that. Now, implementing all that, we have a time frame put together. As you'll see up on the wall behind me, the first components of it began in June. We're looking at the data collection, demographic analysis, the GIS analysis, really underlays everything. The planning visits that we did, principal interviews. Get in the second phase, school district meetings, which we're beginning with tonight. Going forward, we'll be meeting about every 3 weeks. We start next week with the Community Advisory Committee, and I'll go over what the timeline is a little bit later. But you'll see the tail end, the master action plan and final report. We're hoping that that will be around the March timeframe. Might extend a little bit. I doubt it will be any shorter from past experience. The key thing is that we need to leave enough time between various meetings so that questions can be asked and answers can be given. Again, we see this as a process. Those of you that are on the committee, you'll get a binder, but it'll be a 3-ring binder. You intentionally can open up and stick additional things in and take things out of it. We don't see this as a product. It's a process to get to the proper solution. Again, the timelines that we're working with behind you here, going to September 17th. The refinement of data will be occurring. Phase 2, beginning with next Tuesday. We're going forward, as you can see, October, November. Sometime in mid-November, we'll be looking to meet with the public again, present what's come out of the options, not necessarily a decision, just what are we looking at and receive input. And then a follow-up meeting with the administration and board, who ultimately will have to accept recommendation from the committee for final study. Final study then beginning late November, committee meetings in early January, final meetings with the administration board in February, mid-February, and then March. Hopefully we're getting to our end. So that's really where we're hoping to get to. And again, just very quickly, phase 1, the demographics research that we've alluded to. As John talked about, we have ethnicity, income, enrollment. But one thing I do want to mention is that in coding the student data in, we have stripped from the data the student. So we're not tracking any identities, we're using the data in the aggregate. And I know that's sometimes a concern that some folks have. Building evaluations, again, we have reviewed those. We're looking at both practical capacity, that is how the district and district policy calls for buildings and class sizes, and also for comparison purposes only, because it's not really have any value to us in this effort, other than to tie back to previous approvals the district has undergone when we built buildings, what we call PDE, the Pennsylvania Department of Education. If you hear PDE, we're talking about Department of Education, their pupil capacity system, which is really driven more by generating aid and compliance with various statutory requirements for expenditures than it is for planning schools. We talked about facilitated community input process, option ranking, and so on and so forth. As we go in, really you'll just see input, input, input. And that's our process. Again, we have no vested interest in what the outcome is, other than there is an outcome. And then hopefully it's something you're satisfied with. The end of phase 2 then is option comparisons and rankings. What we're going to be looking at least initially, the charge we've been given, even though we've no restrictions have been put on us to date, which we kind of like, but we have been asked to look at certain things. First of those, Elementary school configurations for increased and decreased enrollment. And again, we're going to show you tonight that we're actually looking at decreased enrollment over time as opposed to substantial increases. Elementary school configurations based on optimized attendance areas. Again, attendance areas happen over time. They evolve. Not necessarily the population isn't necessarily where schools were built in 1950 or 1960 or 1970. As you know, the developments, their area was very different than even in the mid-90s. And of course, the school sites, many of them were already in place. One of the things that we've been asked to do, however, was to try and keep neighborhoods together. Now, the definition of neighborhoods can be defined as an entire development, can be defined as a certain street, and I'm sure that'll be a great deal of our discussion as we look at what attendance areas should be. But for any of the above, we're of course going to be looking at full-day kindergarten and a half-day kindergarten, what the impact of that could be. That's something I know that's been looked at and talked about for a great deal of time. All of this, what's the impact on middle school feeder patterns, and what will be the impact on the high school feeder patterns. But one thing I do know, I don't have to worry about, is what the 6th grade feeder pattern will be. With one building, I can't get that wrong. Some of the assumptions, again, that will underlay what we're doing here, and that is the grade level configurations are locked. That is, we're not going to be proposing to change grade level configurations. That's been decided with the decision to move ahead with the 6th grade center. So we're K-5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 12. So we're looking at this throughout our entire effort as if it's 2014 and the building's done. So while we have to use today's data, we're really visualizing 2 years in the future. Elementary schools will be loaded, not like the potatoes and cheese. We'll use loading. We're talking about the utilization. And if we have 100 seats, we want to use only about 85 of those. That leaves room for the occasional bump in a class size, where you have 4th grade that has 4 sections and a 5th grade with 5. We want to have that flexibility. Also need special program space. Things come, things go. We're also looking, as I mentioned, this practical capacity. The district's policy that we begin on, I mentioned the high schools, we use 90% for similar basis. At the high school level and middle schools, that's to allow class changing to happen, because you can't create a schedule where every seat is filled in every room every period of the day. It's just an impossibility. And 90% is a generally accepted utilization standard for secondary buildings. Going to practical capacity again. K through 2, district policy is 24. That may not be what you're experiencing in your particular schools right now, but that is board policy. Grade 3 is 26, 4 and 5 is 28, and 6 through 12 is 30. And particularly look at 6th grade. Department of Education gives classrooms capacity of 25. So you quickly see that you have, when you look at your practical capacities, there's going to be more capacity in that 6th grade center than perhaps immediately meets the eye using practical. In special education, Department of Education uses 25. The reality is it's closer to 15, maybe 12. If you get over that, you need aides, and the program classes just aren't that large. Attendance areas, again, assumption. We mentioned diversity, and we're tracking all those various issues, as John mentioned. We want to look at minimizing the splitting of neighborhood populations, and again, come back and look at transportation, as that is a factor. This isn't a situation where we're perhaps looking at walking. We have a client right now where we have 12, about your size, 12,600 students, and they bus 1,800. Everything else is about walking, City of Erie. So they're very different pictures and very different questions. You ask for the same GIS systems. We spent most of the summer doing a walking analysis of what it would be a mile and a half mile and so on. So we get into phase 3 then, just to give you some idea where we're headed. Final option evaluation, pick the final option. Sub-variants, it should look like that, but with some tweaks. That's where we'll heavily get into transportation. The master action plan, beyond that, we need to look at how does this get phased in. Maybe it can all happen at the beginning of 2014-15. Maybe it'll take 2 years, 3. It depends on the steps and how that can go about. Don't know that at this point. And then finally, communicate, communicate, communicate. We want to get the message out, where the assumptions came from, why the decisions are being made, and that everyone's being treated fairly. And that's key. Bottom line is if we look at facilities utilization, it can be improved. While also looking at the cost reductions for operations. This allows programs to be maintained or even expanded. Student performance comes from proper class sizes, where we have one building with 30 students in a class, another building with 18. They're getting a different educational experience, but if it's in the same district, we want to eliminate that. And then finally, the transparency in the public input process. So that's the boring stuff. Now I'm going to show you some pictures. That's always good for it. What's the district put together? This is our is a progression diagram, and essentially what we're trying to show you here in graphic form are the elementaries in grades half to K. Looks like we're losing some stuff.
Gray.
We're losing color gray. So for those of you that are colorblind, 6th grade center as it will be, 7 and 8. This is basically just showing the 6th grade is being pulled out of the existing Lineville and Downingtown Middle. And the two high schools plus the STEM academies. That represents how your district is structured today. Again, the locations of schools. And we have this, I'll look at the next one, we'll zoom in on. But we've built the mapping.
There's just a lot of gray roads.
Okay.
I think the projector's too bright.
Okay. Well, we'll make it work one way or another. Again, all of this is going to be placed on the district's website, high-resolution versions of these files, so if you really want to get into it. Very interesting graphic. This is going back to 1965, 1966. 3,500 students in the school district. Think about how many of your building sites already had been selected and had buildings on them at that point in time. You can see the trend through the early 70s, leveled out a little bit around 85. The building boom around 95, 96. A little bit of leveling out around 2000. Continued on up. But what gets interesting is you'll notice this kind of leveling out that's happening here. We're going to show you projections that look at what that really means. But what this graphic simply does, it takes the 25-year trend and applies it going forward. So if things were as they had been, the economy, availability of land, the sewage permits, so on and so forth, you'd be continuing up to about 14,000 students in 2035. Now that's not necessarily what we're going to project, but that's just what a 25-year trend is. And this is what you've been dealing with. So that's to today. A couple of things that we observed as we went through the buildings, and probably many of you are aware of this, but I'll just apologize for restating the obvious. All district buildings are heavily used. How's that for conclusion? We found very little empty space, even in buildings that were, I think we found one empty classroom in the entire school district that anyone would have been to. The district has been, as we alluded to, has been implementing small expansion upgrades at many of the building sites, as well as the major construction that's happening now to try and meet the growth that we talked about on the last slide. Another way that they've created space is kind of looking at the modern era, and that is, go back 15, 20 years, we were building computer labs in schools like they were going out of style. There were, one for every 4 classrooms, because computers were expensive and they needed to be in a lab and all this. If you've been in the elementaries or if you haven't, the district is very aggressively invested in what we call COWS, computers on wheels. And also in many of the schools, at least 2 classrooms worth of iPads for the start of school. I know they're being phased into use. All that has had the factor of releasing those former classroom spaces, those computer labs for classroom use. So you essentially built capacity without actually moving a brick. One of the other things we've noticed in many of the elementaries in particular, and again this is not a surprise, is the small size of many of the cafeterias and gymnasiums, or in some buildings a provision of a single multi-purpose room. That's a subdivisible space that's both cafeteria and gym. It's created some scheduling conflicts during the educational day with programs, and in some cases very extended lunch periods. Why do I say this is important? Well, as we're looking at full-day kindergarten, you would be adding additional students into lunch periods could have an impact. One of the other things we noted, and particularly in older buildings, some of the newer ones like Pickering, very well configured for small instructional space. But some of the older buildings there's really a lack of small instructional space. These are spaces for learning support and specialists and someone to meet with students. And that many times has resulted in the conversion of space that was never intended for student use into such a facility, as well as inefficient use in some cases of a full-size classroom for learning support or a small group of students. One of the things that we noted, there's over 110 classrooms in the school district that are designated for some sort of special education or learning support. That's a lot of rooms. Next graphic that we brought up, this is just kind of a 7-year history of individual buildings. And again, you can see the impact over time. These were we're moving from old to new, Kristen?
Yeah, you're moving from old to new.
To
And you
current.
can see at the construction of Springton Manor how everything else, the enrollment sort of decreased a little
With the opening.
in that year, in that time slot. And you can also see with the STEM Academy in the last 2 years when it's had enrollment, that's why your enrollment's dropping in your other 2 high schools.
Right. And of course, what you're seeing is what's coming with the opening of 6th grade center in middle schools, which is your increase. Next. Now, as was alluded to, Downingtown has redistricted on a regular basis in the past, most recently in 2002-03 and 2007-08 timeframes. I mentioned that this redistricting is envisioned for 2014 and is tied into the opening of the 6th grade center. Again, in the past, there has been some political divisiveness as a result of this, and that's why we're so focused on making this a data-driven analysis, scores, rankings, and numbers. One of the things that we noted is that really we saw a great deal of effort to this end to promote the commonality of programs and resource distribution. There still seems to be a perception between East and West, and that's something that we've heard about and we've seen as we've been traveling around, and we know that's going to be part of what we have to take into consideration. One of the other things that we've noticed, and we'll talk about this again, birth rates are actually down over the past 5 years by 10% within the district. Where they were in the 850, 860 range, we're seeing numbers down 770, 760. And why is that important? Well, if you go over it to the next 10-year period, that's 90 students a year. That's 900 student decrease in enrollment, not an increase. So whether that will continue to be the trend, it's economically driven partially. You're seeing that across the country, but you're also seeing it here. And one of the other things we spent a great deal of time, we know this has been a concern in the past, and that is the accuracy of the housing or projected developments. And again, the financial crisis has thrown a lot of things up in the air, but that potential for future development does remain. The same things that made Downingtown a great place to move and raise a family will still be here. It's just a question of when will quantitative easing 3, 4, 5, 6, whatever, actually make a difference and turn things around. But we need to factor that in somehow to the decisions. Now, what have we found? Well, we found the regular education capacity, and now this is going to look like a big number. But keep in mind, I'm counting 6th grade center as if it opened, because it's already a done deal. Contracts are let, construction is happening. So we would be looking at a Department of Education capacity, and that's typically 20 to 25 students in a room. K-12 of 13,571 versus the school districts, and this is regular education. I've taken special education, put it off to the side for now. And what I'm calling practical capacity, those are those sizes we talked about before, the 24, 26, 28, 30, would be 15,172. So what we're saying is that if you follow your own internal policies, your building should accommodate about 1,600 more students than the Department of Education says you should be housing. Now again, don't fall into the trap of using PDE, PlanCon for educational planning. It's simply a tool for reimbursement. It's not a bad tool, but it is only a tool. One of the other things we found, resident students not attending your school system. For this school year, 10th year data, attendance data, it's looking like about 612 are in charter schools. 2,156 are in private schools. 132 are in special placement out of the district, for a total of 2,900 students. So again, your enrollment, you're looking at 12,000 and some odd, about 3,000 students around here, about 20-25%. Why is that important? As you look at the economy, in some cases, private schools are expensive. Do people come back to the public school system? Other chart that I've just brought up, this is the facility enrollment in PD versus practical capacities. And again, the bar in the front is your enrollment. The darker bar that we have here is practical capacity, and in most cases it's higher, and the smaller bar is the Department of Education. So that kind of shows you the residual capacity. And you can see in many cases there's not much. In some cases, there's going to be some. That's the 6th grade center, as it's currently envisioned. Special education, we talked about that. 110 full-size rooms and numerous smaller rooms are assigned to special education. That's an additional 2,750 seats using the Department of Education, 25 per room, or 1,890 using 15 students per room, which is what we feel is a more realistic vision of that. But the interesting number, that means almost 16% of your classroom space that could house a full-size classroom is been set aside for special education. And again, a chart, you can look at this later, shows you just the relative proportions in the particular buildings of special education to regular education space. Kindergarten programming. Long been a discussion in the district, we understand. At the current time, you have 19 half-day classrooms and 4 full-day classrooms. There's one additional IU room that we are not counting in this total because it's operating in a different manner. Since we were asked to look at full-day kindergarten, we simply said for our purposes, using the practical capacity of 24, that may not be what you want to do, but that's what the books, the policies on the books right now. That if we took the current first grade, 877 students, we would need 37 classrooms. And of course, the net difference is there. We would need additional 14 rooms, almost a school, to accommodate full-day kindergarten. So whether that space can exist in buildings as attendance areas move, or whether that would have to be constructed, will be something that will come out of our final evaluation. Some of the other things that we know, and again, we can zoom in on these. I'll wait until we get to the actual student locations. That's probably the more interesting map. But we have the U.S. Census data, which has given us the head of household by race. In this particular case, you can see that you have 2 clusters, one around Pickering Valley and another kind of in the community where we're seeing minority percentages in the 20 to 25% range in terms of head of household. Along the same lines, we've also tracked the number of students, related students under age 18 in particular homes. And again, the darker the color, the greater the number of students coming from a particular home. So you can see we've had a cluster here around Lineville itself and in the upper half of the township, which are 2.2 or 2.1, whereas the area right in town actually is generating the fewest number of students at 1.5 on average. Another item that we track, and in our particular case, we probably is unique in the fact that it's so low, and that is the number of heads of household over age 55. And you may say, why are we tracking this? I'll use the story of Pottstown School District about 15 years ago. 3,000 students, all of a sudden overnight, you had 3,800 students. Now, you know, Pottstown is 2 miles by 2 miles, fully built out. What happened? Elderly folks retired, moved out of the area or passed on, they became great starter homes. And so you had intergenerational shift. One of the things we, of course, also look to track are those areas where we have the highest percentage of older residents. And the darker color again here, or excuse me, the peach color, which is kind of washing here, this color there, and there represent those areas that have the greatest proportion of older residents. I can't say that that will be a factor. It won't be a factor. I can tell you we're looking at about 9%, 9.1% of your residents are age 75 or older in their own homes. I can tell you within 10 years, those are going to change, most likely. And so that's something that, and we'll talk about a projection a bit later. We also have household income available to you. And again, the peach and red colors are your highest income levels. Yellow is your average within the district, and the yellow is $100,000 to $125,000 household income, whereas the darkest color is $150,000 to $218,000. The purple is $47,000 to $75,000. And again, within in town and a small cluster in Lionville. You can see those trends kind of match with some other factors. So we know that. Now, just quickly, building by building, I'll go very quickly through this. Just for those of you who know a particular building, Beaver Creek, we're calculating a PE capacity of 675, and that's 550 regular education students and 125 special education. The practical capacity is a little bit less at 668, and regular education is 558 and 110 using district policy, 469 students. So it would appear that there's a little bit of space there, but all the rooms are in use. That comes down to what is the class size. So what we didn't find in empty rooms, we found rooms that had different class sizes from school to school. Bradford Heights, again, I'll just focus on practical capacity, 769 and 495 students. Brandywine Wallace, 626, 382 students. East Ward, 784, 561 students.
And actually, the more fair comparison is probably to look at the regular education number under practical capacity.
Yes.
That 694 number
I stand corrected.
versus 561. Because that special education number, those are rooms available to pull out special education students. You can't really put
home
in your
room.
typical classrooms
Good
in
point.
those rooms.
Thank you, Chris. So Lionville, 716 versus 736. Pickering Valley, 744 versus 675. Again, Pickering Valley was kind of interesting. I had a deja vu moment when I made it out to Springton Manor, not having been told they were the same building. Shimoda Creek, 620. 463 current enrollment. This is 10th day data from this year, so maybe a little different than what you remember last year. Springton Manor, 693, 433. Euclid Hills, 692, 540 students. And again, a real interesting building in that it seems to work as an open plan school. We don't see many of those. I've made a great deal of money closing in open plan schools over the years. And that one really seems to work, and they seem very fond of it. So, West Bradford, 668, 598 enrollment this year. The 6th grade center, 1,634 regular education capacity, and of course the current enrollment is 0. Downtown Middle School, again, we're looking at this current enrollment. It will be grades 7 and 8, so the number I'm giving you 6, 7, and 8, because that's what we have right now. 1,355 regular education capacity, 1,307 pupil capacity, so you get a sense that it's pretty full. Now, when we've calculated these numbers, since we're talking secondary at this point, that 1,355 has already been derated by 10%. So I mentioned that 90% utilization to allow for scheduling of classes. That's already there. So if I filled every seat, I actually have 1,500 seats. but they just don't work. They just can't be done that way. So Lionville Middle School, 1427, 1,600 students. Again, there's an entire team that's floating in that building by using planning periods, very creative way of using it. Before anybody says, how can the capacities be different on two identical buildings? Well, if you remember, we're calculating the way the building's being used today, making allowances for the special programs. And those special programs have 15 student capacity or may not have any capacity depending on how it's being used. So that represents how many students, given your current utilization, can that building accommodate. So same building, slightly different numbers. STEM Academy. This is an interesting one in that the PDE capacity is 370. And of course, it's 370 because many of the classrooms are under 660 square feet, which is the state's minimum size. That doesn't mean that you don't put a full-size class in them, and hence we've counted that in the practical capacity calculations. As you can see, we're at 604. Current enrollment, current enrollment 604. So it's real interesting. I didn't realize it until now that we're at 100% utilization. Now, that's not really fair because that building has a unique programming configuration in that I believe there are 12 or 14 small spaces that can house, and we saw housing anywhere from 6 to 10 students working on collaboration and functions like that, which would add anywhere from 70 to another 100 seats. But it's something very interesting place. It's the first time in all the traveling I've done around the country that we've actually seen the True Information Commons, a library without books. We've always talked about it coming, and that was the first place we've actually seen it happen.
Do you realize that school only has 9 to 11th grade in it right now?
It has just 9, 10, 11, yes.
Yeah.
It's being phased in next year, will be full. Won't be fuller than it
The
is.
numbers represent
Really?
the numbers right now.
That is this year's number,
The
yes.
next year will be 800.
If you follow the same progression, it would be yes.
Definitely will be, when they take in 300.
It will be cozier than it is this year, so. Our sense was the building's very well utilized at this point. One of the things that you run into when you size a building such as that is you have special spaces and one technology labs, music rooms, art rooms, certain spaces that may not be used every period of the day for classes, and you don't want to use them for anything other than their special function. And so you have some residual capacities not available to you, which also has to factor into how you use the building. But you're right, it's 9, 10, and 11 this year. Downtown East, 1,703 is the practical capacity, 1,659, so snug. Downtown West, 1,817 capacity, 1,495. So again, in a comfortable range. So as we found with the buildings, student data, and I'll just show you one example, and we can come back to anything you have questions on. We know we'll spend a great deal of time in the committee. These are our student position maps. Can you blow them here? And again, the high-resolution versions of all these will be posted in a separate directory on our website, so you can download them. Let's just zoom in into town, perhaps. This is the kind of data that's coded. And John, again, the color codes for each one. Green is elementary. You don't memorize them either. Yeah, pan out there for a second. There's a little bit more there. This feels great when you do that. Okay, red is the elementary, yellow is middle school, and green is high school. Okay. So again, as we've coded this, we have all the student data. And what we've done is we've put the physical addresses in as a longitude and latitude, that's what I'm looking for. So they exist in 3D space. That way, the roads that we have, we're using Chester County's GIS data. There's been a great deal of investment by the county. so that as we look at travel and we look at walking and distances, we're able to snap to roads rather than just bird's eye kind of travel. In some cases, you'll see dots over dots. That means we have siblings in different grades. But one of the problems with this is if I have two students that are elementary, I only show one symbol at that house. So you don't necessarily want to count the rows. When we do it, we call it fencing. That's where we sweep an area and let it generate a tabular report. But all of those are the kinds of questions that once we have this built, we can do. And hopefully that'll make the committee more effective. I think the next drawing I have is kind of a fun one. Oh, I guess you're not going to.
I have attendance boundaries. Sorry.
Oh, you have tennis boundaries? Okay.
Stop.
All right, I'm sorry. Attendance boundaries, and we've washed a few colors out here, it looks like, with the projector, but the next, this is a scatter diagram. Maybe you can log in on this. What we do here, this is a very interesting way to see how students are actually weighted. Showing you an attendance area, it just kind of says all of this goes to a school, but it doesn't tell you how appropriately located the school might be. And while there are other algorithms we can do, this type of a document is real interesting. For example, if you look at East Ward, you kind of get a sense East Ward's in the wrong place. You know, if you look at the number of students and the travel, you can kind of look at the intensity of color. That tells you kind of the intensity of travel that's happening to get to that school site. And so, Euclid Hills, again, almost is not an attendance area. When we see these kind of drawings, it kind of tells us maybe the attendance areas are not completely optimized. If you want to be seeing, kind of, a centroid of the schools at the center, or mostly at the center, subject to interstate highways and lakes and stuff of that nature that you can't cross over. But, thanks. And we've tracked the same data in middle school and have it available to you. We track the same data in high school. And high school is just kind of interesting because you have that third facility that doesn't have an attendance area, but you've got other students coming from kind of all over the place to get into STEM. Again, we simply just map very quickly what the utilization is, and we're using practical capacity, not PDE capacity again, and this is just building by building. On the elementaries, again, keep in mind 10% is our goal, 90% utilization. So if I see a building that's at 9 or 11, East Ward, Lineville are fully used by that standard. There's some space in Springton Manor, no surprise. Some space in Brandywine, Wallace, and Bradford Heights. I don't think that's a surprise to anyone. And so on. And of course, Lineville Middle School, you can see it there. And this simply does the same thing looking at the PDE capacities again for numbers wrongs. But the previous graphic's really the important one that has any validity. So now getting into enrollment projections. So that's where the students are. That's what we found about the buildings. What do the projections tell us? Well, the first thing that I'll bring up here is the Department of Education's projection. Not a terribly scientific model. It uses pure cohort survival. And when we say cohort survival, we're talking about how many students made it from last year into the next grade this year. So how many kids went from second grade to third grade. It looks back a number of years and assumes that pattern will continue. Well, that, of course, does not take into account different birth rates. That does not take into account the effect of industries coming or going, the effect of economies slowing, things of that nature. Those external factors, the closures of schools, changes in enrollment policies within the district. But this is the model that was prepared, and they're a year behind. The department, this was from last July, we're waiting for a new one. But as you go forward, you go back just a second. 2012-13, they're looking at 12,193. But they're showing you going up to 12,860. Again, they assume level birth rates, and they're looking at birth rates of 860. Going back in time, that's the next slide.
And they also assume that if they increased last year, then they'll increase this year also.
So you can see in the past 900 in 2006, 850 in 2007, 859 2008. They projected 824, 826, 828. You see a pattern? 2 more each year. No idea why 1.18% or 1.018% increase every year. We're going to we look at a bunch of models to try and factor that in a different way and get a more accurate. This is important to a district when you're building a school. The fact that that's a very high level projection is great because that's what your aid from the state's based on. Doesn't work well for planning necessarily how to use a school. So next. Again, we looked at live birth projections, and again, you kind of see how the numbers have been dropping. What we're actually seeing is 859 to 824 in 2009 to 770 to 757, and then down to 758 as a projection for this year. These are actuals, so you're seeing a declining trend, and that factors in over the next 10-year period. What we've done here is we've used the Department of Education's model, and we've simply updated it with current data. That's the live births and actual 10th day enrollment from last week. And using the same methodology and running through here, you can see instead of 12,800 students with the current data we have, we're 11,917 currently, that there's a little bit of a bump up. It's around 12,000, stays 11,959, 11,800, and then starts to track downward to 11,394. Now again, this is the Department of Education's model. It doesn't figure housing, doesn't figure out any external factors. It just looks at it in that manner. Next. And then just the cohorts, groupings, K to 5. That's saying about an 8.6% decrease, 11% decrease in grade 6, 4.2% decrease in 7 and 8, and a 3.4% increase in high school. Those kids are already in the system. One of the things about all of the enrollment projections, they can be pretty accurate for the next 5 years because those kids are born. I don't know what happens in 2 years. Have a blizzard, and things go up. Power outage, that's been tracked. Next. What we do then is we go through a series of models, and we'll talk to the committee about these, but there's 8 separate models we use. The standard cohort survival method, which I just showed you, retention rates in least square births, 4 years average retention rates in least square births, 4-year rolling averages in least square births, retention rate and 10-year average births, 4-year average retention rates and 10-year average births, 4-year rolling average retention rate, 10 years. All of those generate something a little bit different. What we have typically done is we take an average of those because that takes the statistical issues in and out and use that as our baseline to which we apply housing development and other factors. It tends to deal with that birth, live birth issue. And again, you can see where you're at right now. You've been level. A little bit of a bump this year. I think it was 157 students upward. A little bit more next year, and then steady kind of a trend down. Not a collapse, but definitely not the growth that first chart I showed you the past 25 years, or 35 years would let you believe. Thanks. And again, the average of all of those methods, what I just showed you on those charts, simply shows you 11,900, tracking about 11,008 for the next 6, 7, 8 years, and a drop to about 11,006 in 12 years. And again, at 3 years of, as you go out 10 years, 3 years of low birth rates, such as what we have here, has a huge impact because you have 90 less students times 10 years, that's 900 students. And that's kind of what you're seeing, you're starting to see factored in here. Next. And then just the same thing by grade cohort. Again, K to 5, about a 5% decrease using the average of these methods. 6.4% decrease in grade 6, about a 4% decrease in grade 7, and about a 2.6% increase in the high school. So again, there's that bubble in the system already working its way through. Area growth and development. Again, we spent a great deal of time trying to hammer this down. We have a lot of data that we'll share with the committee. This is kind of an overview here tonight. But what we've attempted to do is identify, is this the zoning map first?
This is zoning first.
Okay, this is zoning. Zoning is important in that says what we can do. I know the district's had some experience with zoning in terms of what's permitted or not permitted in an area. Basically, it tells you what can be commercial, what can be housing, what the density can be, how many houses per acre, things of that nature, where is agriculture or recreational preserve. So we have this data, same kind of high level of detail we showed you for the student level data, and that becomes important. Because one of the things we looked at is what a 40-year build-out can be. And that is one of our models. That is, if every home site that could be developed that hasn't already been built would be built according to the maximum permissible zoning, what could the district look like in the future? How far could it go? Because the reality is you will run out of space someday. You know, and so what kind of bookend does that give you for planning? Next. Again, these are property assessment values. Again, this has a role in determining whether it's an open site or it has a home on it. Yes. Okay. This one washed out. This is the maximum build out? Okay.
Yeah. Essentially, the green is the farm built out, so lower density. The peach is residential built
You're
out.
calling that kind of the green, kind of the peach, okay. I apologize for the colors. I look much better at home. You lose a lot of data with that. The next one's probably the most important one anyhow. That is the potential property developments.
And it's somewhat marginal also.
That is washed out as well. You want to zoom in on the location with me? Probably out here.
Get better to-
That's one open. Okay, now in this particular map, for example, we're seeing potential developments that have been plotted. That's the numbers that you're giving here?
Yeah, that's just the key. Essentially, what we were mapping were the differences between areas of potential development, some of which have been already approved. Some of which have already been approved by the respective townships, and some of which are just sketch plans and ideas and future concepts, and some of which are just very large pieces of land that nobody's really sure what they're going to do with them. From time to time, people have made inquiries or developers have made inquiries. And so we're looking at a lot of these things. A lot of these plans also have an approval, but require something else to happen first. They've taken their plans in, the township thinks it's great, but they need to build a sewer plant. Once that sewer plant happens, whole lots of things are going to happen real fast. So it's a question the economy and working with the committee, I think we'll be able to narrow down a little bit better what things may happen in what time frames based on familiarity. But a lot of it's based on the economy and the situation. So when the sewer plant happens, you're going to see a lot of that 10, 20-year growth, maybe slide a little bit closer. If a factory were to come in and Vanguard were to suddenly build on that lot, then things that have seemed like long shots that are way out there could happen as soon as somebody can put a shovel in the ground. And they have their approvals to go ahead and do that. But until it's economically feasible, it's out there.
Thank you. Now, what does all this mean? We have the next page, once we jump back out of that. Gives a little bit of the tabulations, the way we're looking at this. As she was mentioning, we talked about the first eight models that we averaged together, looking at that birth rate information. Model 9 looks at housing development in final permitting or under construction, we call Code 2. Model 10 looks at housing proposed for the next 5 years. On Model 11 is within the next 10 years. And then finally, housing at that 40-year build-out that we talked about. So as we look through here, these are the numbers of students that could be generated in each of these particular circumstances. We then go forth, apply this based on a certain number of phase-in years, 5 years for the more immediate, 10 years for the level B, 20 years, and then 40. And apply those against enrollment projections to see what could happen and what that might be. Some of the other models that we'll talk about in a second, we also look at what would be the impact of voucher programs, private school return, intergenerational shift I mentioned, and charter schools. And I'll come back to those, but well, before you go on that, just go back for a second. One of the other things that we're tracking is the number of households with children. Of the overall homes by particular municipality, we have 31% of the homes down in town that have students under age 18. And in there, the average home generates 1.7 students. By contrast, Upper Euclid, we have 55% with 1.9 students being generated. And then the others in the 40s. And this is actually a fairly high number, which fits your status as a bedroom community. So then factoring in what that housing development could bring about. We started with 11,917, which is the 10th day data from this year. If you remember our enrollment projection, just the raw enrollment projection took you down to around 11,003. You'll see that this actually bumps you up and carries you up to around the 13,000 level if all of the development that's been projected in the 5 and 10 year were to occur. Now again, I have no better guess than you do in terms of what the economy is going to do, just that the potential still exists. So we'll have to weigh how much of a factor that is in the final modeling of the attendance areas.
Now, it's worth noting that following the original PDE cohort projection, PDE was predicting 14,000 students without anything. So this number is still lower than the original cohort model provided by the Pennsylvania Department of Education. So even if it's optimistic, it's not earth-shatteringly.
And again, what that would mean is about an 8% increase in kindergarten K-5, 5.7% increase in 6, an 8% increase in grades 7 and 8, and about 15% in the high school. So again, contrast that to your experience over the past 10 or 20 years, where it was much greater than that as you grew from a small district. And again, those particular models, this is the baseline that we're talking about without housing development. The average R methods, as we come up, the average of all planning in the works. Max is in year 5, because we have it happen fairly quickly. These are the ones we know are happening. So if that's factored in, we come up to about 12,500 in 5 years. As we look at the high probability, these are the ones that are plotted. Construction hasn't started, but they have an approved plan. Again, that trends up, takes you about 12,009. And finally, the low probability, as we'll call it, that's your 40-year build out. That's if we would build 100% of the housing units. And I believe how many housing units did you predict, John, in the first go around? About 22,000?
Yeah, the first go around, I think 32.
Right. And that's based on that maximum build out, what you could possibly put by filling every square foot with the maximum density. We assume 40 years. So if you built out everything on an even basis over a 40-year period, you can see that in 10 years you'd be at 14,008, and you end up going up substantially higher. Not saying we believe this, not necessarily saying we believe this. We are saying we probably believe that this has some factor to it. So those are what we'll have to weigh as we go forward. As I mentioned, the other, we call them shift scenarios. And I'm getting to the end of this, so for those of you who are falling asleep. Basically, we looked at several models. The first, you'll see here, is the impact of voucher program. We assumed, completely arbitrarily, at this point, a 10% impact on vouchers. There are districts where we're looking at a 30 or 40% impact, such as Erie or Williamsport, or places that where you have truly failing schools and a real desire for parents to do something different in surrounding districts that are willing and able to take the students. In your case, you have a very unique district, high performing. We simply, for the purpose of modeling, said, what happened with 10%? And how would that factor by all the birth rates we talked about, what would it do? The second model here, you see in green, this is charter schools. And this just assumes that the number of students would double that are currently in charter schools. Right now, it's 5.19% or something like that. So we go to 10.4%. I don't know. Yeah, it depends what the state does. It becomes very different. To cyber charters become substantially, better or changed, more acceptance. I tend to believe that there's only so many students that can sit home with a computer without mom or dad there. So there's only so many of these cyber charters that can happen. That would be that factor. As we come down, the impact of private schools. Again, the private school factor. We assumed if 20% of the students that are currently in private schools, Catholic schools, or other paid positions were to come back to the school system, you can see that factored in would be about 11,009. And intergenerational shift, that's assuming that all current homes owned by people over age 75 in the district would flip over to younger family with the similar rates that we already have by township. That is, if 40% of the homes generate a student and an average of 1.9, that's what it would give you. So again, it gives you 12,002 down to about 10,004. Again, nothing crazy and wild, but it gives us some other factors that we can bring into the final decision. So that's what we had tonight that we wanted to introduce to you. We'd certainly like to take any questions, listen for comments that we can take into account. I said I'd take about an hour and a half, about an hour and 40, so I kept my contract with Jane for that. Take any questions you might have. Yes, sir.
We're 4 years into the recession. Do you have any data on how many students are coming from private schools back to
The question is, 4 years into the recession, do we have any current data on how many students that come over? I don't, but it's a question I should have an answer. We should be able to get an answer for it. We have that data. What we have right now, we have all students in the district in our system, whether they're private school or public school. So we have 15,000 students in our database. So it's an easy thing we can pull out. Yes, sir.
I have a question. Eventually, when plans come out, do you look at the way, do you take all this data and just start from scratch and say, here's a boundary, or do you look at the current boundaries and say, okay, where can we expand, contract to meet with these numbers?
Both. The question was, when we go to do this, will we start with all new attendance areas, or will we take the current attendance areas and modulate them? I can tell you the first exercise we've already begun, and that's what we call optimized school locations. That's where we ignore the schools existing, and we say, what would happen given the population distribution we have today? Where is that centroid? Where should the school be? We're actually working with the Chamonix School District. 5 years ago, we identified where that should be, and it was on the site of a school they closed the previous year. It's taken 5 years and change in school board to get back around to using that site. But that's a very powerful model. And once we have those centroids, it gives us, we can start looking at existing schools and see how we might want to weight. It's a very strong visual tool to get to that. I know that at the end of the day, I don't know that it's, from what we're hearing, that it's as important what school you go to as the sense of east and west right now. And there are some other things we'll be talking about later that might mitigate that a little bit, and that sense of what that could be. But we're not seeing this necessarily as, we're not gonna start with an incremental, we may come back to that. We have all that data in there, we know exactly where current attendance areas are. We just need to see what that will be. We'll also then do transportation cuts, because that may tell us something, that even though on a map it looks nice and centered, but you realize you've got to go 2.5 miles out and around, that may not be, quite the right place either, so we have a little challenge in front of us.
Can you come up to the mic or?
Yeah, maybe. Oh, there we go. Can you tell us real quick, and the school board members, what's the next opportunity for, unfortunately, the 100 of us are here, for the next input? I know you have 3 committee meetings, one's coming up on September 25th. Can you review that timeline? Did I hear that you're going to have options at that point, and you're going to go through a couple of options and then submit a final option through the committee? When do we get additional input? Before you submit that final option, is that an option? Sorry to play that word. And are we allowed to attend those committee meetings? So when do we get, I know we have 30 people selected, great people, but you have 11,000 homes, 11,000 students, which are more people here. How do we get more input during the process versus waiting, sorry to repeat myself, until we see that last option? And those of us that went through this were here last time we did this a couple years ago, not getting to a point where we get 50 people in a room, three displays, and everybody goes, crazy. Where do we get more input as you go through the process to make it easier for both sides?
Well, the next public meeting will be sometime in November, understanding that it's going to take a few meetings among the committee to start generating ideas. However, every school board, second Wednesday of the month, we meet as a school board. We will be giving updates at those meetings also. And if you have questions, may not be able to be answered, but it's a great place to ask the question. I understand what you're asking. We are not having open committee meetings. We want the committees to meet honestly. And you know what? Someone may suggest something that's totally out in left field, and you do, and something to think about for the committee to digest and think about. We don't want public then to be, all up in arms because they heard that somebody suggested it at a committee meeting. So that's what happened the last time. And so that's what we want to avoid. We'd like the committee to be able to look at the data honestly and express their concerns. As I said, we tried to pick people that are on bubbles that, it's unfortunate that there are neighborhoods that seem to periodically get moved, but it's a border, it happens, but with only moving every 7 years, we really don't ask a student to move more than once. Not that anyone wants to move at all, but you saw the numbers. The numbers are very, very, 380 in one building and 700 in another.
I would agree with the closed committee meetings, but did I hear you right? Will there be an opportunity for input before
Oh, absolutely.
before the final is submitted to the board?
Go to the next slide, that shows where you have.
Yeah. And let me suggest that the committee isn't intended to be a closed-door committee of, a secret society to decide. You're welcome to discourse with them, on an individual basis, make suggestions to them, because all of those people were chosen because they represent all of the areas that you all are in. So if you have a concern, you're welcome to discuss it with a committee member and kind of encourage them to see your point of view so that they can come and present that. And if you have an idea, to pass it through to them. That way we're working with the same consistent team. But it doesn't mean they can't take outside ideas from all of you. And we would certainly welcome that.
And the 3 board members, you can certainly contact them. The principals that are on the committee also will have input. It's not that we don't want to hear your suggestions in any way, shape, or form.
No, I appreciate that. I think a lot of people just want to know what communication process you have this year versus, exactly what happened. You don't want that to happen again.
And in the end, the committee will make the recommendation, but be real clear, it will be the board that decides the direction of the redistricting, of the ultimate redistricting. So I don't want the committee members to feel that they have the weight of the world on their shoulders. We're stuck with it. So, and you can vote us in and out of office depending on what we do. So, but really, I want them to be be honest and forthright and be able to express their opinions and their concerns in the committee process.
Jay, you also mentioned the website will be updated.
Right, the website will be updated regularly, there'll be question and answers, a Q&A on the website, so you can put your questions there. I know tonight, they handed out index cards, if you have a question you'd like the, committee to consider. If it's something we can answer, we're certainly, for general information, we'll put it on the website. Yes, sir.
Hi, Michael Marks from Upper Euclid. I thought I heard in your opening presentation, you said that the seniors in 2014 would be allowed to continue what school they're in despite whatever redistricting occurs.
Correct.
I thought at the end of the last sort of round of community talks, that it was also 11th grade.
Now, what was discussed at 11th grade, the question was asked, and ultimately the decision was, it really would depend on the numbers and the whole transportation issue. So it's not out of the realm of possibility, but it's not anything that, in my understanding, that the board committed to at that time. They did commit that seniors would be allowed to finish their senior year at the schools that they had done the first 3 years.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
Dr. Mussolini, do you have anything to add?
Thank you, Jane. You did a great job.
Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Okay, as I understand, the goals of the committee are to minimize splitting neighborhoods, transportation issues, balance economic and racial diversity, as well as the better balance the utilization of facilities. One thing I wanted to ask is, there have been some speculation that it's also been suggested that elementary schools not be split as far as where they go. And so I have a question, but a comment first. Seeing as there's now a 6th grade center, and everybody's going to go to that, and then make friends with children in 10 different schools and then split, the idea of not having a split elementary school seems to be less important because you're not, going to east or west, you're all convening. So I wanted to ask if one, that rumor was truth, and if it is, if, you consider the bigger picture and not.
I think we, as a committee, we will certainly consider the bigger picture. What you just stated will be something I'm sure that will be discussed, because even within the board, there are members of the board that truly would like to keep a neighborhood school, and there are members of the board that feel that, just as you said, with everyone going to a 6th grade center, perhaps it isn't as important. It is a numbers game to a certain extent. So we're going to have to see what the data shows us and determine, not any one of these factors can be the only determining factor. It can't be strictly transportation. It can't be strictly diversity. So
Again, I'm not suggesting a neighborhood be split, but the idea that a school can't be split, if everyone's against that idea, then it seems that they would then be against the idea of the 6th grade center, because that's what the 6th grade center does, it splits everyone. So you can't say you're, for both ways, because it's the same issue. So if you're for the 6th grade center where 6 gets split, then you should, include the idea that a 5th grade, everyone goes there.
we may look at, okay, what would it look like if we kept the schools together? Okay, that's not reasonable. What would it look like if we, using transportation as a guide, perhaps it is more realistic that the schools are split. But it's not a decision we're going to make tonight, but it is certainly something that I'm sure will come up in our discussion.
As we look at all these issues, we go through a ranking process when we evaluate options. And one of the things that will come up is, are these kids going to be split? Are they going to find each other again? Are they going to end up in the same place? Are they going to get to go to high school with the same kids they went to elementary school with? And that ranking will have an importance, weighting to it, so that we'll be able to decide, yeah, it'd be kind of nice to do, but it's only sort of important, and so these other factors might outweigh it. So it may or may not become a factor, but we'll be able to determine that. And again, if you feel strongly one way or another, make your opinion known to the committee, so that when the committee's applying that weighting factor, they can say, that's more important than we thought it was, and so that they're representing it.
And just as an additional comment, just having seen redistricting over the years, my son and my daughter, my 2 older children, went through the 9th grade center, and I learned very quickly how large Downey County is, because, Friday night I'm up past Eagle, over on the border of O.J. Roberts, and, the next night I'm up in West Bradford on the border of Coatesville. I never knew 82 square miles was as large as it is, and that may be what the sixth grade center brings. He was also the class that was as a senior split, which the board is determined not to do this year. But I will tell you, the children, the students are incredibly resilient, and the internet anymore keeps them so connected. And our community, you could go to East Ward and play at Darringtown Little League or LYA. I mean, they're meeting children from across the district every day, and they really do adapt. So it is a very emotional thing, but
That's why I say, the argument of not with elementary school is less important because kids are resilient as well. Plus the sixth grade center idea.
And the irony is that a number of years ago, we took a neighborhood in Spring Hill and we moved them from East Ward to Beaver Creek. And people have become very close friends of mine, and they came to meetings and they were very upset and they wanted to stay on the east side of town. They're now sophomores, juniors, seniors in high school. They love the experience they've had and wouldn't have wanted to change it anyway. So, it is what it is. Well, I think bottom line, as a district, we want to do what's best for all our students, and a more balanced population will give us what we desire. So, any other comments or questions? Yes, ma'am.
I'm just curious how you project for special education. Part of the discussion is you're basing a lot of the numbers on, birth rate and what happens if we continue to move upward and not so much downward or stay the same. But one of the things that you had said is there's 110 classes across district for special support, and how low those numbers should be in downtown view. And when, the news comes out every day that it's one in less numbers of kids being diagnosed with autism, one in 88 now, how do you project for what that's going to mean to the district?
Really, again, it gets to be such a difficult projection that really all we can do is use the current identified IEP rate and carry it forward when we're planning capacities. I've seen districts that have gone from 13% special education identified students to 18 or 19 over a relatively short period, but that's usually a bigger demographic shift that's occurring. I don't see that being a factor here, but that's really all we can do is carry it forward given the model we have.
I'd like to, yes, sir?
One last question. I believe it was mentioned at the beginning that the implementation plan to be phased out. Like, some parts of the first year and then the other one. Is the steering committee going to be allowed to provide the implementation plan? And, what factors do you think will determine a phase out versus an only implementation plan?
That was the first I heard that when Mr. McKissick said it's something, they phase it in. I don't have any expectation that that's what we'll do with the opening of the new building. We'll move students, that's what we've done in the past. I don't know that the committee may come up with something different. I know that in the past when that happened, particularly at the elementary schools, the principals did a phenomenal job. They created buddy systems where students started the year before, because we will have a year before it goes into place where they'll have pen pals, they'll meet in the park, they'll have the opportunity to go visit their new schools. It's not something that you're going to find out on August 15th. That comes September 1st, you're no longer going to Euclid Hills, you're now going to Lineville. That's not the way the district operated in the past, and I don't anticipate that in the future. And I do believe that our implementation will probably be one and done unless something unexpected turns up in our committee meetings. I'd like to thank you all again for coming tonight. Please feel free to send questions on the internet. My email, jbertoni@vasd.org. I may not have all the answers. I may not have an answer you'd like, but somebody will get back to you if you have a question for us. Thank you. And in response to the wireless question, I had forgotten, I put a map out there, and it has the dots where everybody lives that's on the committee. So, general dots, not actual addresses. But it'll give you an idea of the area. Thank you again.